morning, Gregg Chapel. I have to share you a little anecdote. Though we belong to a United Methodist church and I was raised Catholic, I used to spend my summers up in Battle Creek, Michigan, because it was kind of bad to be in Chicago. My grandmother took me every Sunday to Mount Zion AME Church in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I think Grandma Maxine's smiling right now. So today I'd like to talk to you about a passion I have, and that's about health disparities. Health disparities are the differences in care, diagnosis, and outcome among some disadvantaged populations, and maybe even just women. I'm going to talk to you about disparities in breast cancer among black women and how these can, and indeed how they must, be eradicated. In the U.S., breast cancer is the most common cancer after skin cancer. It is the second leading cause of cancer deaths behind lung cancer. In the year 2023, the American Cancer Society predicts there will be over 300,000 new cases here in the United States. Good news is that deaths due to breast cancer have decreased over 40% in the last 30 years with yearly early detection and what we call center-based care, going to a center with expertise in its management. Unfortunately, there is an alarming gap in the death rate between white and black women. And this is true of a lot of conditions in our country, sadly. Despite the fact that a number of new cases are very similar between black and white women, this disparity persists. Black women have a 40% higher death rate than white women, often related to late diagnosis and access to care issues. Aggressive breast cancer, which is a form of breast cancer that is more serious and rapidly develops, is far more common among younger women, regardless of race. So therefore, young black women have twice the rate of breast cancer than young white women. The two most aggressive types of breast cancer are most common in black women. These are known as triple-negative cancer, which means it lacks the markers that a lot of other cancers, and it's very aggressive and grows very fast, and something called inflammatory breast cancer. So these two types, again, are sadly more common in younger women and more likely to be diagnosed at a later stage, particularly in black women. The racial differences are decreased and often eliminated in states where Medicaid gets expanded. And my wife said not to be political, but Florida is also a state that hasn't fully expanded Medicaid. Sorry, sweetheart. So far, this is all bad news, but there is hope in research. Expanding the participation in research among African American women is critical. And we as African Americans have a fear of research that is not totally unfounded. Many of you may recall the Tuskegee experiment. Tuskegee experiment was sadly a test, if you want to call it, or a research project to see what happened if you didn't treat syphilis. And the subjects were black men. And to this day, there are still sequelae of those in Tuskegee, Alabama. But what we know is that if we can expand the participation in research to include our people, we're going to get discoveries, new modes of treatment that are going to be more effective in our people. So one of the issues is access to care, and I talked about Florida's issue, but we're going to go beyond that, and I'm not going to be negative about that. One of my fraternity brothers is head of nursing over at Twin Cities, and that is a very good hospital, and that is a hospital where a lot of things I'm going to talk about today, you can access there, okay? So inquiring about research opportunities, which we've always been somewhat hesitant to do, is something we need to get over, because we need to be active participants in research so that the findings of those research are applicable to us. And I would offer to you that's a form of biblical stewardship. Securing care at a regional cancer center. We all have private doctors, we all have people that we trust. But in reality, if you have a serious diagnosis, you need to do research. And you need to find a center that has expertise and physicians and providers and tests and diagnostic equipment to treat that. So securing care at a regional cancer center, which one of my fraternity brothers assures me Twin Cities is important. We also, as people, because of the misdeeds that have been done under research, we are very hesitant to be research. But in cancers now, the breakthroughs are occurring as we develop those new studies. So if you're given an opportunity to be in a study like that, you're going to get access to late-breaking care. You're also going to be able to be a part in proving and designing that care for people like you who might follow. One of the basic cornerstones to any medical care is having a good primary care provider, okay? And while I was a specialist, the referrals came from primary care providers because they are what we call your medical home. So you want to have someone who educates and advocates for you. And I think those physicians clearly exist here in Fort Walton. The other thing that's special about black women, I say this about my wife, my mother, my grandmother, they're often the center of our family. And they can be burdened by a never-ending list of responsibilities while also trying to provide themselves self-care. There's not a mother in this room that hasn't sacrificed in some way, in many great ways, for her children. But we need to let them know that that self-care is not selfish, but we want them to be just a little bit selfish and focus on themselves. So I ask the women here, educate yourself on screening needs. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. Interestingly enough, breast self-exams are no longer recommended. They were inaccurate, different people did them different ways, and a lot of cancer was missed. Breast observation is important, so when you women, and not to be inappropriate, and you're looking at yourself in a mirror, or your mate is touching you, and you feel or see something that's abnormal, don't ignore it, because that could be the first sign. So breast observation is important, and what you're looking for is any kind of change. Something is different. Something may be wrong in your breast, and it should result in you contacting your doctor. Mammograms have changed. Mammograms are now specifically three-dimensional mammograms, and you need to always go to a center that can do that type of mammograms. And these are recommended for all women beginning at the age of 40 because early detection is critical. The smaller the tumor, no matter what its type, at the time of diagnosis, a greater chance for cure. And I'll give you a telephone number if you find yourself in a situation where you're not able to afford it. The state of Florida has a program called PINK. And the number is 305, and I'll leave this with your pastor, 348-PINK. And that is a program here in the state of Florida that will ensure, regardless of your ability to pay, that you get a mammogram, and the right mammogram, a three-dimensional mammogram. So there's certain risk factors that may indicate earlier and more frequent, the need for earlier and more frequent mammograms. This issue should be discussed with your primary care physician. I'll give you some of those examples. These risk factors: getting older. Most but not all breast cancers are diagnosed at the age of 50 or above. And I already told you that screening with 3D mammograms should start at 40, okay? If there's a family history of breast or ovarian cancer, if you start at your menstrual period before the age of 12, or you start at menopause after the age of 50. Now let me explain that. Those are driven, your menstrual cycles are driven by certain hormones. Those hormones are active between those two ages. So it's very important to be looking at that as a risk factor in terms of your age. Any previous treatment, for whatever reason, with radiation to the chest or breast after the age of 30. So say you had some type of operation or surgery in your chest, you've had multiple x-rays. That also is a risk factor. And when I say risk factor, it doesn't mean that you're going to get breast cancer. It means that you should be alert, that you need to be surveillant, that people need to be checking you. And let me just say something about that. One of the things that we as black people, and I had a not-for-profit that he alluded to, we often go to the doctor, and the only thing we want to hear is that we don't get any bad news. So the doctor will ask you, how you feeling? You might have all kinds of problems. You know, doc, I'm good, okay? Don't do that, all right? Doctors are not magicians. We're not psychic, okay? If you have an issue, there is no problem that you should not discuss with your doctor. The only wrong problem is the one that you didn't discuss. Also, if that doctor's got his hand on the door or her hand on the door, you slow them down, okay? Because they're not going to walk out on you, and that's what I mean about being proactive about your own health care. Other risk factors is also exposure to a drug that was often used for fertility called DES or diethylstilbestrol. It's not around anymore, but if some of you older women found that you were that you received that drug at some time, that's important for you to look at. So some other risk factors that you can control. Almost every cancer has associated with having a less than active lifestyle as a risk factor. So not being physically active may put you at risk. So more importantly, being physically active is associated with health. Being overweight or having obesity, particularly after your menopause or after the change. Any hormone replacement therapy, and let me be clear that there are clear indications for hormone replacement therapy, and please don't go away and say this crazy pediatric doctor told you not to get hormone replacement. Just realize that, again, if that is something that you've had, that is something your doctor needs to know because it may be a risk factor despite all its potential benefits. Okay, reproductive therapy. Again, if you had a first pregnancy after the age of 30, if you did not breastfeed, that is actually a risk factor. And never having a full-term pregnancy, so if you never carried child to term. These are all things that, I don't want anybody to be afraid of, but these are things that you need to know so that you become an informed consumer. And when I say informed consumer, there is very few things in our culture that we don't spend, or somebody doesn't spend more money on than health care. But our literacy about health care, our expectations about health care are some of the lowest in the Western world. Because again, we want, and I'm guilty as anybody, we want to go to the doctor. Don't want to hear no bad news. Don't want to tell the doctor something because you don't want to go down that path. But you have to be informed, and doctors are not magicians. So if it's bothering you, if it's an issue, you need to mention it. And that's for all the people in this audience, male or female. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about very briefly is drinking alcohol. Alcohol is a risk factor for almost all cancers, and this is also true in women that drink heavily. Social drinking is not a problem, but alcoholism does a lot of different things to our metabolism. It activates and deactivates things that are both protective and harmful. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell. This should, more than informing you, this should make you more interested, so to have those informed discussions with your doctor. Because we doctors are not magicians. Sometimes we're busy, sometimes we're preoccupied with our own life. There are very few doctors that won't stop that rapid pace. If you say, Doc, I got something I need to talk to you about. Or, oh, Doc, you didn't address this, okay? You have to be proactive. I always use the analogy that we as people of color, we'll go out to buy a car, a stereo equipment, whatever, ever. We will spend weeks reading about it. We will look at Walmart, we'll look at Costco, we'll look at all the things to make sure we get the best care. But again, we go into a doctor's office and we just don't want to hear bad news. And again, we doctors are not magicians. Now, one of the things, as I end, is we had a program that he alluded to called Not One More Life up in Atlanta. And what we did is we worked with churches to do health screens. Because as your pastor and most pastors, they teach you stewardship. And stewardship is about your health. So one of the things I'm launching with some of my fraternity brothers, and we're going to have some Qs working with us too, Pastor, since he cracked on us. But anyway, we're going to start doing programs where we'll come to churches like this and we'll do simple screens, no cost or anything like that. And the interesting thing about this is the hospitals are 100% behind that because they don't want you to drop on their doorstep as a disaster, which is going to take up time and resources. But again, if I leave you any thought, God's greatest gift, or one of his greatest gifts, is our health. God expects us to be stewards. So be stewards of your health. And I thank you for your time.